less than a couple of weeks ago, I think many of you were here for the Graciela Iturbide exhibit opening, and what a great event that was. And we have an embarrassment of riches here, because tonight we have three of Texas' leading novelists, Sarah Bird, Elizabeth Crook, and Stephen Harrigan. Welcome. 2006 marks the 20th anniversary of the founding of the Southwestern Writers Collection. And here tonight we are thrilled to have our founding donors present. And if you can, help me recognize Bill and Sally Wittliff. Now, the Writers Collection and the Wittliff Gallery both represent kind of an innovative and unique partnership between private donors and a public university. And working together, we're creating first-class collections to benefit present and future generations. And those of us privileged enough to work here realize every day that it's a lot of fun to contribute to this mission. And just as these collections benefit from the support of the Wittliffs, we're also fortunate to enjoy strong support from Texas State University. And with that in mind, I'd like to recognize and thank Dr. Denise Trouth, President of Texas State. And also tonight we have Dr. Van Wyatt, Vice President for Information Technology. Van. And Joan Heath, the Associate Vice President for the University Libraries here. Hi, Joan. Most of you know the Wittliffs founded this collection with the gift of J. Frank Dobie Archives, and they've continued to help facilitate and make incredible donations over the years, and they remain very active. And as much attention as the Wittliffs get, and deservedly so, these collections are really a result of many donors coming together over the last 20 years. We benefited from an entire community of donors, writers, musicians, filmmakers, and artists, and others who have stepped forward to help give shape to this vision for a world-class collection. And several of our donors I see are in attendance tonight. I want to thank you all, and I hope we can continue working together in good ways. And I'd also like to note that each of our writers here on the program are major donors to the collection. And each has contributed manuscripts and correspondence, research materials, these amazing calendars where all the dates are aligned for every character in novels, and just wonderful things. And you see some of those on exhibit in our Treasures of the Southwestern Writers Collection exhibit that's up. And there's some funky material that we have. Steve is a scuba diver and has written Water and Light, and we have a pair of his swimming fins. And Sarah, you wrote in a bathrobe for several years, I believe, and that's actually in the current exhibit if you haven't seen that. That's when you're working on the Mommy Club, I guess? Or?
And boyfriend school.
Boyfriend school, okay.
And parts of Alamo House.
Okay. It's a well-used bathrobe. So. Well, I'd like to think that these writers need no introduction, but let me briefly tell you a bit about them before we move on to our conversation. That's just a joke. It's only 2 pages. Sarah is an Austin-based novelist, journalist, and screenwriter known for her comic touch and her insight into human relationships. She's the author of several acclaimed novels, including Alamo House, The Mommy Club, The Boyfriend School, Virgin of the Rodeo. Her 2001 novel, The Okota Officers Club, was named by, and I just found this out today, Amazon.com's fiction and literature editors named it one of their best books of 2001. And the Associated Press put it on their list of 5 novels I'd read again. And Sarah's book, The Okota Officers Club, also won the Best Novel of the Year from the Texas Institute of Letters. Sarah's received several honors during her writing career, and earlier this year, the Writers League of Texas presented its 2nd annual award of literary merit to Sarah, which was a nice honor indeed. Sarah's written screenplays, published magazine articles, and in 2005 she took over Texas Monthly's back page column from Kinky Friedman when he resigned to run for governor. And I don't know if Kinky wants that gig back now or not.
We're talking. I think we may split it, you know, sort of do a point counterpoint thing.
And Sarah's newest novel, The Flamenco Academy, came out earlier this year. And as with her other work, it's joyous and unpredictable. The Baltimore Sun praises it as a deft exploration of love, desire, and jealousy told against the backdrop of that most complex of dances, flamenco. So please welcome again, Sarah. And Elizabeth Crook, like Sarah, is an Austin-based novelist. She was raised part-time, part of your youth in San Marcos.
A lot of it. I went all the way through public schools here.
Did you?
And yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay. And you were also in Washington, D.C., where your father worked he was the director of Lyndon Johnson's Vista program, and also in Australia, where your father was ambassador during the Johnson administration. How old were you when you were in Australia?
I was 9.
9. Okay. Very nice. Elizabeth is the author of 3 novels, The Raven's Bride and Promised Land, which were published by Doubleday in the 1990s, and both of those were edited by Jacqueline Onassis. Her latest novel, The Night Journal, was published by Viking earlier this year. And this book, along with Elizabeth's previous books, has garnered extraordinary reviews, even among those critics who can be kind of grumpy and hard to please at times. And for example, Tom Pilkington in the Dallas Morning News wrote, "Miss Crook's prose is elegant, and her novel is a page-turner. The Night Journal more than meets my personal standard for quality fiction. When I finished, I wish there were more." And I'm not sure, but that may be the first time Dr. Pilkington has praised a novel since Larry McMurtry's first book. So that's saying something, folks. Elizabeth has also published in periodicals such as Texas Monthly, Publishers Weekly, and the Southwestern Historical Quarterly. And earlier this year, she was the selected writer honored as part of the 2006 Texas Writers Month. And her first novel, The Raven's Bride, is currently the Texas Reads One Book, One Texas selection. So please welcome Elizabeth. Stephen Harrigan, also from Austin, is a novelist, screenwriter, and journalist who became a star writer at Texas Monthly beginning in the 1980s. He's the author of 3 nonfiction books and 4 novels. And his very first novel, Aransas, was listed by the New York Times as one of the notable books of 1980, and he's continued to do very well ever since. In 2000, he published The Gates of the Alamo, which became a bestseller and has drawn favorable comparisons to Larry McMurtry's Lonesome Dove. And indeed, The Gates of the Alamo is already considered a Texas classic. As a screenwriter, Steve has written several award-winning made-for-television films, and his latest book is Challenger Park. Here's what the New York Times says about Challenger Park. "A fine, absorbing achievement. The payoff Harrigan achieves is subtle and intense, a marvel, really. This is a stately novel whose emotional precision is matched by the exactitude of its prose." And closer to home, a reviewer in the San Antonio Express-News said, "Few writers could master, as Harrigan does, the technical detail of a shuttle launch, while also communicating the sense of wonder that overtakes one's soul while leaving the planet." And with our other writers, we're very pleased to have Steve here tonight.
Who was that writer in the San Antonio?
I don't know, some hack writer, I think. So the way we'd like to do this is we want to have as free-flowing a conversation as possible. I have a few questions which I'll probably run out of at some point before too long, and then I'd like to open it up to discussion from the floor. So if you have questions, be thinking of those, and we'll get to you guys in due course. Let me just ask each of you first to tell us a bit about how your most recent novel came about. Sarah, can we start with you?
Yeah, my most recent novel, Flamenco Academy, was based on an obsessive love affair I had, and I always knew I wanted to write about this experience because if it had not happened to me, I probably wouldn't believe that such things occur, that you do fall in love at first sight and remain obsessed for years with a completely inappropriate person. So I knew I always wanted to write about that experience, and as I cast about for how to do it, I kept running into brick walls because I discovered that my typical voice that I use in my writing didn't work to convey what I was trying to convey about this overwhelming, completely tumultuous experience that I had had. Because my typical voice is humorous, and that introduces kind of a note of detachment that didn't work. It kept the reader from being immersed in the experience. And so, I mean, it took me a long time to figure out that was wrong. And then I, moved into, when I finally found flamenco, that's when the book came together.
with the Night Journal, I had just finished writing. My first 2 books were historical fiction and had been very research intensive, and so I thought I wanted to write a contemporary story that wouldn't require as much research. And I was casting around for ideas, and for over a year I didn't come up with anything. But then I took a trip out to New Mexico with some friends of ours, and while we were staying with them out there, they said, you know, you should drive over and look at Pecos Pueblo. And it's just such an interesting place. And so I drove over there by myself one morning and went down into one of the kivas. And it was just magic. And it's that moment that every writer, you know, is always searching for, where you find a place or a period of time where you think you could live, you know, for the next few years. And so I really loved the place, and yet it would be very hard to write a contemporary novel. And I was hoping to do kind of a light novel, because my others had been very heavy historical fiction, and so it would be hard to do that at Pecos Pueblo, because there's nothing out there but ruins. There's some kind of low walls and these kivas in the ground. And so I thought, well, maybe I can base part of this in the past, and if I put only half of it in the past, I'll only have to do half the amount of research. And of course, it was really a ridiculous idea, because the book ended up taking twice as long to write and being twice as difficult, because I was piecing together, you know, the past and the present. The story takes place in 2 time frames. It takes place in the 1890s and in the 1980s, and I was having to piece together 2 stories, 2 sets of characters, make it work as a whole, you know, create a mystery from the past that's solved during this archaeological exploration in the present. And so it really was doubly hard to write, and it took me 10 years. And the entire time I was just kind of groping my way through it. I didn't really have a big vision about what it was going to be and where it was going to go. I was chapter by chapter kind of feeling my way into it. And in the same way that when I came up out of the kiva, I saw, as I was leaving Pecos, this sign that said Las Vegas 60 miles. So I thought, well, I'll go over there and see what's going on. And because Las Vegas, you know, and I hadn't been there, and so I drove over there. Well, of course, it wasn't Las Vegas. It was Las Vegas, New Mexico, and so there were no billboards and, you know, flashing lights or anything. And when I, you know, went into the little hotel, the one little place that was there, you know, and said, "Is there anything in the area?" They said, "Well, there's this old abandoned kind of a historic hotel that's up in the mountains about 10 miles. And so I drove up there, and that was the second location for my story. So it was really just a matter of kind of feeling my way through things and finding things by surprise, and ending up with a book that took a long time to write and was very inefficiently written. But for that reason, I think had some kind of nice surprises that I couldn't have thought through in the beginning.
Well, first I have to say, Steve, I love the idea that I could give you guys a pair of my old swim fins and become a donor. I get these letters from Denise Trouth and people like that thanking me for my old socks and stuff. This book, which is Challenger Park, is a novel about a woman astronaut, and it came about because I was really tired of writing about 1836, as I had to do in the gates of the Alamo, and really wanted it to be in the present moment where I didn't have to look everything up on microfilm. And I was down casting around for various ideas, but I was visiting my family. I have a number of relatives who live in Clear Lake City, which is the Houston suburb where the Johnson Space Center is. And that's where they train the astronauts. And I was at a soccer game for my niece, and I was standing there on the sidelines, and everybody was cheering on their kids and their, you know, relatives. And my sister said, do you see that woman down there, down on the other side of the field? I said, yeah, what about her? And she said, well, this was a woman who was cheering her daughter on. She said, well, last week she was in space. And I just thought, that's a novel. It was one of those moments where you think, what is that like? You know, what is it like to be a mother and an astronaut? And how do you say goodbye to your kids when you're about to go on the space shuttle? And I just started pondering that, and I didn't have any way through any plot or story yet, or even any characters. But I was driving down NASA Road 1, which is the street that runs in front of the Johnson Space Center in Houston, a big boulevard. And I passed this thing I'd passed 100 150 times before probably. It was a McDonald's right near the Saturn drive gate of the Johnson Space Center. It was like any other McDonald's in the world, except that it had a big fiberglass astronaut on top of it, and the astronaut's left arm was extended, and in his hand he was holding an order of fries. And I thought, So I pulled into the parking lot and just started thinking. And it occurred to me, the first scene of this book occurred to me, a woman astronaut, her kid is sick at school, she picks him up, takes him to lunch at McDonald's to buy him a Happy Meal. And that just kind of was where it started. I just started to think about this woman, about this kid, what that would be like to have to deal with, on the one hand, this enthralling, dangerous adventure, on the other hand, the ordinary life that we all exist in. And I wanted to the challenge for me in the book was to make the space stuff exciting, but also to make the ordinary stuff exciting, to write about the Luann platter at Luby's with the same fervor I wrote about weightlessness, and so that was my goal, and whether or not I succeeded, well, time will tell.
So Steve, with you and Elizabeth both, it was kind of that power of place in a way that helped spur the idea for the novel. Was that true for you, Sarah?
Usually it is. Almost all my novels have come out of place more than character. I know most writers talk about it as the reverse, but for me, it was this essential idea of conveying the obsessive love affair. And then once I hooked that idea up with flamenco, then flamenco just metastasized and took over. I had no idea how complicated flamenco is. I think, like most people, if I thought about it at all, I thought about the big pink bird, and then the dance. But as I discovered in my research, it's more about the guitar and the singer, and they work together as this very tight little triangle. And flamenco itself is completely saturated in culture and history, and every beat of this art contains codes that the gypsies brought in their migration from India 1,000 years ago across Europe and into Andalusia, where flamenco took hold and then eventually made its way to the New World, where we've seen this incredible manifestation in New Mexico, where I set the novel. So it didn't start as place, but it became place because inadvertently I chose such a strong setting.
And I know that one of the things that you get from the novel is how flamenco is sort of a closed society that's hard to penetrate in a way. How difficult was it for you to do research with that subject?
It was very difficult. It was very difficult, particularly in Austin, because, well, actually I take that back. It was very easy because Perry Castaneda Library has a lot of great material. But as I got into that, I discovered you can only go so far, as you might imagine, with such a physical art. You can only go so far with the written page, and then you realize you have to see it. And more importantly, you have to talk to the people who practice it. Because as I was reading, I would read one thing and get very excited about it, and then the next thing I'd read would contradict it exactly. So I realized that it's kind of an inexact art, and I mostly just had to be in classrooms. I had to watch performances, and I had to talk to a lot of people.
And I know from what you were saying, Elizabeth, that joke, and it was a joke about only having to do half the research. And I think that's one of the misconceptions that people have about writers, is that historical writers have to do a lot more research than people who write in contemporary times. Can you talk a bit about
you find that wherever you set your story and whatever the context is, you have to know that period, and you have to know it really intimately. And it's harder in the past because if you, for instance, were just have somebody drive from Austin to San Marcos, they were going to travel from Austin to San Marcos. Today, you just kind of pick out what kind of car they're on. You drive the route yourself. You can look and see what's on either side of you, and you can pretty much describe that trip. If you're going to have it happen 100 years ago, you've got to know, or 150 years ago, where the road was, what they're driving, how many, animals it takes to pull that conveyance, how often these animals are going to need to stop for water and where the water is, and if Onion Creek is really a creek, and, all the things that could go wrong along the way. And each one of those things has to be found out. And so that is always a very time-consuming endeavor. But when you are doing contemporary fiction, and I learned this, there is more research than I thought there would be. Because, for instance, mine deals with an archaeological exploration, so I had to know something about archaeology and about New Mexico, just the vegetation, the landscape, things that were not, firsthand to me. I had to find out, and so you really realize that everybody who's writing is doing research, and that it's an enormous requirement, and yet it's so exciting because it is like a treasure hunt. You find one fact and it leads you to another. And for me, the research is really what fuels the story, because as you read, you get ideas, and in fact, I had at one point been reading a book that on Texas history when I was writing my second one, and it had this great scene and this wonderful thing that happened, and I underlined it and said, use this. And when I turned the page, it turned out I had read this book 2 years before in my research, and I had made this big note on the next page, use this. I mean, I found the same story and thought the same thing, that you knew this was good material. And so it is the research that really, for me, is the skeleton of the story, I think.
Yeah, I completely agree. I mean, I think one idea that people have about novelists is that, and some do, some can write fiction without doing a bunch of research and just sit down and do it. But for me, inspiration almost always comes out of active seeking out of information. And it's really exciting, I think, both in terms of being in a place where something happened or where you're going to set a scene, and learning about the person's job you're writing about and what they do. I'm working on this screenplay right now in which one of the characters is a local television news reporter. And I was kind of spitballing it. I had the character holding up a microphone to people and interviewing them, and I thought maybe I better think about that. So I called a reporter friend of mine, and she got me, I went out to the production truck, and the guy showed me all the editing tables and the monitors, and I saw how all the cameras worked, and it was like a 2,000% boost in my enthusiasm level for this character, because I could visualize with real specificity what his life was like. And so I think it's one of the things I always tell writers too. People ask about writer's block. I think of writer's block as an information deficit. You're stuck because you don't know the character well enough, you don't know the world they inhabit well enough, and you need to kind of just go learn something, and that will kind of goose you along.
So how eager were astronauts to talk to you when you were working on the novel?
Well, astronauts are not the most talkative people in the world in general, and I had to kind of work at it. I spent about 2 or 3 years altogether talking to people, and but I had to kind of target. I had a fairly specific target. I wanted to talk to women astronauts specifically. I wanted to talk to instructors and trainers and people like that. And after kind of working my way through the system a little bit, I found 1 or 2 people, one in particular, who knew everything about the Johnson Space Center, who trained astronauts, and she really got what I was doing. So I'd have all these individual sessions with astronauts, and I'd ask them questions, and I'd get relatively taciturn answers. But with this one person, this woman named Lisa Reed, I got everything I needed. I could call her back and say, hey, ask her some specific question about training or about weightlessness or about orbit maneuvering, and would get the answer quickly.
One of the fun things about research is just how riveting it is to a writer, because that material is usable. And I remember when I had finished the manuscript for this, and my editor, we all felt that we needed some more action in the beginning scenes of the historical part, in which this woman is traveling to New Mexico on a train. And in the first draft, basically, she travels on the train and she arrives at her destination. And there wasn't a lot going on, and so my editor said, we've got to, you just need some action closer to the front of that. And so I told Steve, okay, I need action closer to the front. Do you have any ideas? Because I can't come up with anything. He said, well, why don't you wreck the train? So I thought, well, that's a great idea. So I called my editor. I said, what if I wreck the train? And she said, that's a terrific idea. So I got all these books on train wrecks and 1890s train wrecks, and started reading about couplers and all the it's really fascinating to read about train wrecks and so I said to Steve, why is it that suddenly I'm staying up till 2 o'clock in the morning to read one more chapter about train wrecks when I have just put down 5 historical novels that I could not get into? And what he said was so true. He said it's because the historical fiction has already been filtered through somebody else's imagination. That material has been taken, but when you are doing your research, it's all there for the taking. And so, and it's true, when you're writing, your mind is so engaged and thinking creatively, how can I use this? And what's good here, plucking out the dramatic parts, and that is it's enormously exciting to a writer, that phase of the writing process. Even to me, sometimes more exciting than actually trying then to change that into fiction.
Okay, when we were thinking about whether or not to serve liquor tonight, the part of the I guess worry that some people had was, well, you're bringing these writers here, and writers are notorious for being difficult people, and drunks, drug addicts, string of failed marriages, and you three are very interesting.
I take offense to that. Would you like to step outside? You and me.
And it's funny because when Steve even has been praised for exploring decency as a character trait, which is really kind of an interesting way to approach character exploration. And so each of you appears on the surface to lead happy, stable lives. You're parents. You're married. And so what's the deal?
How else do you have time to write? If you live an unruly and woolly life, you got plenty of material, I guess. But what we've just been saying is we go get our material. We don't have to live it. We can go appropriate it from other sources. And so I think it'd be very distracting to be drunk all the time. Or, I don't know, it just feels like everybody's the way they are, but I think we're all kind of
truthfully,
okay.
Truthfully, it makes you great role models for younger writers who, will read biographies.
I think there's that misconception that writers need to be sort of tormented souls, and I think there's something to be said for having been there, having been tormented at some point, but you can't be very productive when you're in that frame of mind, so you have to get past the torment before you can actually write about it or write about, write anything, I think. So yeah, stability is it's good. It's
Yes, I vote for stability as well.
Thanks, sir. We were wondering. So. Well, and in your last novel, you were writing about a parent and each of your parents. And do you expect to write more about parenting and child raising in your future works, or is it too early to say, really?
Well, my novel I'm working on now is about a father-daughter relationship, basically. So yeah, that's true. And I think, because I'm obviously not writing about my relationship with any of my daughters, but I think it's such a parenting, or being a parent is such a powerful thing. There's no more powerful emotion, I guess, except true love. And I just think it's one of the great themes. How could you not be attracted to it as a writer?
One of the difficulties, though, I think, is that I'm finding, because in the book I'm going to start on, there's a kid, there's a boy, and he's about the age of my son a year or so ago, and it's very hard to keep your own kids out of it. And you wonder later. I think it was Laurie. Who was it that? I can't remember, but her kids just hate her because they felt like she made them into characters, and they weren't necessarily portrayed in the way they'd like to be portrayed. And it's Madeline Lingle, I believe. There's a lot of bad feeling from her kids that she sort of used them as characters. And I may be misspeaking because I only read one article on this, but that was the impression I had. And so you have to be careful, but it's very hard not to inject your own kids and their characteristics into the children in your book, because that's what you have access to, and that's what you know, and that's the child that you've been relating to all those years. So it really, I find it sort of troubling and problematic to create a child who is not my child and know him well enough when I could use my own great kids and really have good material there, and yet how would they feel about it later? I don't know.
I just had an interesting experience with this lovely young woman in the audience, and I was talking to her, and she just said these perfect things. I'm not going to repeat what she said. I don't want to embarrass you anymore. But I said, "You are the character I'm looking for. Can I talk to you? Because I'm trying to create a character who's the polar opposite of my son. So he's going to be, the character is going to be 17, but she'll be female and very motivated and academic achiever, because I just don't want to get too close to home. I want to so what essentially I think I want to do, kind of what you're talking about, take the emotions, the parenthood emotions, but put it into somebody who's not my son, because he would really, really not appreciate me writing about him. However, this young woman here, no, so I am going to interview a lot of, I want to. And also for me, as far as parenthood goes, I always dreamed of having a daughter, and I had a son, and it was probably one of those great unanswered prayers that was a good thing, because I don't know, I had this vision of the perfect child. She'd be 11 years old, and we'd be reading The Secret Garden together, and that's such a bad preconception to go into. So no, I got just a totally different version of that dream. So I think you take, for me, you take the emotions, the really powerful emotions. Like for me, for example, in the flamenco book, a very, very powerful emotion of first love. But I harness it to a completely different scenario, totally different characters. But the emotion is always the same. I mean, I knew for me what was the emotional truth of that experience. And I think the same thing kind of happens with parenthood, except it's going to be somebody I don't know. So my son will be happy about that.
In your Texas Monthly columns, you often write about your son. How does he feel about that?
I think I've been really careful about that. I've never named him. I call him Teen Boy, and it's so generic. Any reference that I've made to him is so generic that he really doesn't have much grounds for complaint. And I let him read, of course, every word that I write and tell him what I'm doing. And
does he pass off on it then? Does he
absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, there's just no question. If he had any tiny problem, I just wouldn't do it. I could make up stuff. I don't need him. That's what I remind him. However, and it's interesting that the designer of the book that I wrote the foreword to, Between Heaven and Texas, is here. And we were talking about, I wrote the foreword to that, and that's actually the thing that he's objected to most. I wrote about my experiences with clouds in this whole big photo book, and he maintains that I misquoted him in that. And the very end section, I talk about, we're going for a walk, and I mean, I wrote it down, so I know I didn't quote him incorrectly, but of course, it was a year ago, and he's reading it a year later, and he doesn't think he could say anything that's stupid, but we were walking up, and then all of a sudden there was this big kind of windstorm and this funnel. I was asking him, what are your memories of clouds? And he says, do you remember that time we went for that walk and it was storming outside and you're so crazy, you made us go for one of your crazy walks. And we were going up a hill and all of a sudden this brown funnel of clouds came and they whooshed up and I thought we were going to die. And I said, but what about your happy memories? And he said, well, looking at clouds, I mean, do you ever look at clouds and see things in the clouds? He says, no, Mom, that's stupid. You just decide what you're going to see in the clouds. Like you're going to see Mr. Peanut, and there's Mr. Peanut. And so I just love that he said that, but he maintains I misquoted him.
So I don't want to go on and on about parenting, but I'm curious, Steve and Elizabeth, how do your children feel about y'all being writers?
I don't. I mean, they know I'm a writer, but I don't. I have a 10-year-old son and a 5-year-old daughter, and I don't think they take much interest in it. I mean, it's just sort of what I do during the day. It's kind of an annoyance to them because I'm distracted, and I'm not sure they should be all that impressed with it. It's just what I do, during the day, like other moms may get up and go to work or do whatever. And so I'm hoping that someday, they'll read my books and like them. But other than that, when I dedicated this book to Joseph and Lizzie, and so when I showed the dedication, Joseph sort of got it that this was special, and Lizzie, she looked at it for a long time and then she said, "Does it have any pictures?" And her feeling was, well, really, what's in this for me? I mean, there was just not anything that seemed that interesting to her. And so someday I think she'll kind of like that. But otherwise, I think that when you grow up around whatever it is your parents do, it's so commonplace that there's nothing magical or mystical about it. It just is what they do.
Yeah, I've been trying to impress my kids for a long time. I mean, now that they're older, they're all grown. I think they do read my books, and I think like them. I mean, they tell me they do. But there was a long period where they were kind of mystified by and kind of annoyed, I think, by what I did for a living. And for a long time, I was writing travel articles, kind of freelance travel articles. That's how we would fund our family vacations, and there would always be somebody following us around, taking pictures and stuff. And I remember once I said to Charlotte, our youngest, when she was about 7, I said, "Guess what? We're going to Disney World." And she said, "Who's our photographer?" So I grew up with a kind of odd, somewhat jaded idea of what writers.
Who's our photographer? And part of our mission here is to inspire young writers. And I think that when people who are thinking of becoming writers, or even people who want to be good readers, come here and they study the works of the writers or see the exhibits and see the materials, one thing that they're continually interested in is how what path you followed to become a writer, and when did you know that you wanted to be a writer? Like, for example, in the exhibit we have a little songbook that Willie Nelson created when he was about 11 years old, and you can see from that, kind of what he was destined to do. Did that come early for y'all?
I started writing really, just very bad poetry when I was little, and I had different ideas of what I was going to be. I was going to be a ballerina at one point, and I was going to play the guitar, and I actually sat around for a year strumming the House of the Rising Sun and sitting on the dock of the bay, and nobody ever said, play that again, or I just wasn't any good. And so, but when I would write something, and I look back at some of that stuff now, because of course my mom saved it, but it wasn't very good, but I think it was what I did the best. And so so there would be some encouragement. And I think most kids kind of gravitate toward the things they do well or that they get praise for. And so little by little it became clear to me that none of these other avenues were going to pan out, and writing was the one to go down. And so then you just get better. I mean, you just keep, when I started, well, y'all know because you have all the square footage of drafts. Your donations, to the collection are measured in square footage, and my square footage I think exceeds everybody's, because I go through so many drafts because they're never any good in the beginning, and I have to rewrite so much. But that's sort of the path I took from the very beginning, was just a lot of trial and error, and finally getting it right after getting it wrong a number of times.
Yeah, there's no path. You just stumble on your own process in a way, and I mean, I'm kind of sometimes alarmed. I was talking to somebody earlier about writing programs, and them, which are great in many ways, but this idea that sort of crept into our minds that you have to study to be a writer, or get some kind of degree, I think is misleading. I think writers are people who just stumble upon this themselves and start writing and start reading, and it just comes very naturally to this is what our interests are, and I think a lot of it. You have to have a high tolerance for loneliness, a high tolerance for sitting in a room all day by yourself, imagining things, and being very frustrated by the way they come out, and yet having a kind of determination to keep heading on with it. And, you know, nobody can help you with that but yourself ultimately. You have to have this vision may be too fancy a word for it, but, you know, certainly determination, because this is what you want to do more than anything else. And for me, it wasn't clear, but it was kind of apparent from about the 5th grade on, when we all had to write a little Christmas poem in my class, that I liked doing this, and it actually was pretty good at it. And I think it is what's kind of what Elizabeth was talking about. You get praise for it, or you find that it's the course of least resistance for you, and it gives you a little boost of self-esteem when you're good at something, and you want to continue being good at it.
Well, and I think also, though, there has to be that drive, because there usually, for most of us, is a lot of discouragement along the way. I mean, most of us don't write something great right off the bat, and so there are rejections and criticisms, and that continues, you know, forever. And you have to have this sense of drive that you will keep doing it no matter what, and otherwise, I think there's just no success in it.
Yeah, well, I just completely backed into it because I grew up in a military family, and so as few writers as most people ever see, I saw none. I didn't really even see anybody who was identifiable as another occupation besides a warrior. So it never was in my head to be a writer, and I don't think I would be a writer if I'd, you know, just attacked it head on. But I kind of backed into it and told myself I was doing something for money. I was not writing. I was making money, and I was in France for a while, and over there, because nobody would speak to me because I didn't speak perfect French, and so I found these photo romances, which are kind of like the telenovela kind of things, but pictures with captions, so very good colloquial French, and so I was learning colloquial French by reading these things since nobody would talk to me. And then I got this idea, like, somebody writes these. So when I got back to America, I looked up the equivalent market, which was True Confessions. And I was 20, and I started writing True Confessions, which just broke my mother's heart. She found my stash of True Confessions, and she just cried, and she said, "Oh, my relatives in Indiana with green teeth read True Confessions, and now you're reading True Confessions. We sent you to college our hopes were so much higher for you than True Confessions." But they were anonymous, and so that's, you know, I crept into it just thinking, you know, I'm just making money. I'm not. So I was actually a writer making money before I ever got the idea that I could be a writer, and then that's how that worked.
And you were writing romance novels for a while, too.
Oh, do you have to bring that up as well? True Confessions enough. How about the pornography? Mention that too, Steve. Yeah, I wrote 5 romance novels.
Yeah.
And you had a pseudonym for those.
Yes, I did, Elizabeth. Tori Cates. Rush
They're
Out.
very popular, too.
No, they weren't.
You see them on eBay for $50 and stuff. We tried to get some for the collection. But
Are you serious? Are you serious?
A couple times, yeah.
Oh my God, that makes me sick. No, then when I was writing romance novels, and I think still they're like groceries. You know, they come out for 1 month and then they're gone, and they were $2.95. And I wish I had a warehouse full. I'd be selling. Tori Cates would be making some money for me. She never did.
So how hard was it for you to transition from writing that into writing this great quality fiction that you've been producing?
There was no transition whatsoever. It was always a very distinct category. I spent one summer in Washington. I wrote pesticide brochures for the EPA. You know, had exactly the same relevance to what I ultimately wrote as the romance novels. I mean, they're just, you know the markets, you know the requirements, and you write that thing, and then you write what you love.
And Elizabeth, let me ask, since you've been writing in Texas Monthly Summit, you've been writing these kind of really neat portraits of your family. How have they responded to those?
I haven't written about anybody who was still living, because I think it's very tricky. I wrote about my my great aunt sister, and about my dad, and it's, you know, when you write about somebody, you have to portray them with their flaws, and yet, if it's somebody you love, obviously you're going to portray them lovingly. And I really didn't find that difficult because but both the people I chose to write about had very strong personalities, and wonderful traits and annoying traits at the same time. And so it's just like when you build a character, you have to show all of that, or it's not interesting to people. And I think we really love characters, as much for their weaknesses often as for their strengths. And it's the same way with, when you're writing about people in your family. But I would not write about anybody who was still living in my family. It would just, it's just uncomfortable.
And one other thing I wanted to ask about too is that y'all are all from Austin. How important is it, do you feel, to have a community of writers? And for example, Elizabeth and Steve, you read each other's manuscripts, and can you just talk a bit about all of that?
Well, I think it's crucial. I mean, I don't think it has to be a formal. I know Sarah has the same kind of network. I think it's just such an isolating profession. I mean, writing novels, you're just basically, as I said before, it's sitting there by yourself, and you're whistling in the dark. You don't know what. You have an idea after years of experience whether what you're writing is any good or not, but sometimes you just need to kind of field test it with somebody else. So I'll call Elizabeth and maybe I'll read her a paragraph, or I'll call, Jim Magnuson or Larry Wright, other friends of mine, and, run an idea by them. I don't tend to do that, very much, but there are certain times when it's critical to me to have some feedback, and then just somebody to talk to about the common experience of writing and publishing and dealing with everything is really, because people, people who have the same jobs like to get together and talk, and so we have the same jobs more or less, and it's important to us, I think, to feel like we're part of a group, a guild or something.
Well, and they're jobs that do require so many hours alone. So, a lot of times when I call Steve, I'll just say, I'm bored. And he'll call and say, I'm bored. So it doesn't even, it's just the sense that it's comforting to know there's somebody else stuck in front of a computer, at the same time and for hours a day, and that they're pretty much going to be there to answer the phone. It is a nice sense of camaraderie. And the nice thing about writers in Austin, I have found, is that everybody's on your side. There is not that competitive kind of, I don't know, sort of secretly wishing ill for somebody that goes on, I think, in New York. Maybe I just imagine that. I've only been to New York a few times in my life, so I don't know. But, I assume in other, I hear that there is a lot of competitive feeling in other areas. And in Austin, you really don't feel that. You feel that, when you do something that's successful, that everybody's proud of you and they're on your side. And it is a great sense of camaraderie. The writers in Austin really love each other. And we all show up at each other's, book signings in case nobody else comes. And we expect that everybody to come to ours. And, there's just that sense of reciprocal, support. And it's really nice.
Yeah, I agree. It's quite a phenomenal community. And I think for me, one of the most important things was like being able to be in a city and know someone like Steve and Elizabeth and Bill Wittliff, because it just expands your horizons so much. You get to meet these guys and see they're not gods on Mount Olympus and two arms, two legs, and maybe this is something I could shoot for as well. And that's been very, very important and inspirational for me.
And when Bill was, as a screenwriter, Bill is the master. He's the guy Bill Wittliff, who invented the idea that you could be a screenwriter in Austin. And, it's really remarkable, not only this collection, but what the path he's blazed for other people like us, and there are other people in town. Austin is getting to be a place where you can sort of legitimately be a writer. You don't have to be an oddball writer. You can be, people can build a career from here. And that didn't used to be the case not so many years ago. It was very difficult to think about staying in Texas and maintaining any kind of career at all.
And I'm curious about, we tend to think of you all as Texas-based writers and even Texas writers in some ways, although you have national reputations. And I'm curious, when you go out on book tours and you're in other states, do people see you just as writers, or do they see you as these exotic species of Texas writers?
They usually
People
see us
don't
at all.
come. Yeah, people don't come, right?
I wouldn't
Yeah.
know.
I'll tell you what, in
That was a
Orlando,
short
they
answer.
have no opinion of me whatsoever. I went to this one book signing. I was the only one there.
Okay, well, tell us your book tour stories then, your worst book tour story.
Oh, Steve, kick it
Yeah.
off. Right.
No, I mean it's a weird thing. This whole the kind of this kind of thing we're doing. I mean, because we're basically, I think all three of us are kind of shy, and I think most writers are kind of private people. And there is this. I think within the last 20 years or
Yeah.
so, there's been this thing that you've got to be a public person too. You've got to be, appear in places and talk in public, and which is fine. But it never occurred to me that was part of the job description when I started to be a writer. I just thought being a writer was writing books and then sending them off and hoping for the best.
Yeah, Steve and I have been saying for weeks, I'm so tired of hearing myself talk. And about 3 weeks ago, we started saying, and I'm so tired of hearing you talk too. I mean, we suddenly realized that we really were sick of it, because it really is true. I mean, you go. I mean, and a lot of times it's a fun group. To me, this feels like home, because San Marcos is my home, and I know so many of you out there, and so that's a different thing. But a lot of it, when you're on the book tour, it really is very promotional, and it's like a dog and pony show, and it is disconcerting if you're not completely comfortable in front of crowds, and so I mean it's a whole different world, and you do it for a period of time after your book comes out, and then it's over, and you're back, and just about the time you get in the swing of it, and you kind of, like the attention or whatever, it's done, and you're back in your room, and you have to write another book, and so there's a real juxtaposition there between, duties in this job.
I really don't have much.
You agree,
on
Sarah?
that.
Okay. Well, I think that's one of the things I admire about each of you is that you grew up basically as shy people, and then you're out there interviewing astronauts or archaeologists or flamenco dancers and doing that as part of your art. How hard has it been to do that?
It's a lot easier than being an astronaut. Talking to them, I mean, it is. I think for me, one of the big obstacles to becoming a writer was getting over the shyness of approaching people, and that was one of the great gifts to me of working for Texas Monthly for so long, because I learned how to call people on the phone, and I learned how to be not so self-conscious when I approached them, and how to try to ask for information in a more or less direct way, and it just opened up a whole world to me. And I think that's an occupational hazard of many novelists. I think I certainly had it. Is a feeling you just want to stay in your own head. You want to stay in your own world and not burst out of that territory. There's the famous dictum, write what you know. And if you don't know anything, which was the case with me, that wasn't good advice. And the only way I was able to get to know things was to in my case, be a magazine writer. And I learned how, I could not have written Challenger Park. I could not have written The Gates of the Alamo without a basic ability to sort of put myself out there and talk to people and ask for favors, for information, take people to lunch, and it became it's a crucial job skill for me. Is this ability to kind of mix in with the people I'm writing about.
It's true. You have to contact a lot of people, because you find that with research, you can spend days and days and days looking for some minor detail, or you can develop a relationship with the archaeologist, out at Pecos, and call her on the phone and say, what would they have found 6 inches under, on the hill, and that takes 10 minutes as opposed to a couple of weeks, and so you do have to develop these relationships. But I'm like Steve was. I mean, I have to get my nerve up before I call anybody, and and because you always face the chance that they're not going to be helpful, or they're not going to take you seriously, or and how do you really impress somebody in the couple of minutes you've got, how do you let them know that you're a serious writer without sort of bragging about what you've written and seeming like you're full of yourself? And so, but you get better at it. But it's still, I think, I'm always inclined to spend lots and lots of time with the books, and figure out everything I can from the books before I'll actually pick up the phone and call an expert.
Yeah, I was like Stephen. I started out in journalism, and really my big opening for me was doing photography, and that's a great avenue for shy people because you have the camera in front of yourself. You can go anywhere. You become kind of invisible and blend in, and it's also great training in general for a writer because you have to find the detail that tells the story. So that was wonderful for me as far as getting out of being shy and mixing with people. And in general, people like having their picture taken. They act like they don't, but they actually do. And so that was a good start for me. And then, being a journalist was great, talking to people and finding out. But I agree with Steve. It's just essential for what I do. And the change that we've seen in the last 20 years from when writers were very, very private people, and the only people who ever read were somebody like Norman Mailer or just some hugely, colossally famous person. It never occurred to me that I would ever have to appear in a public arena like this. It's one of the reasons that I chose writing, because I thought, never have to get up in front of the Alkek Library and talk. That will never happen in my future. But it happens now frequently. And I agree with Steve. It's not a bad thing that writers are public people, but I think that sort of the stakes keep being raised, and in some way there's more of an opening for writers. Like with the Flamenco Academy, I have every time I appeared in a bookstore, whenever I possibly could, I had a dancer with me, and that was really, really wonderful, and readers loved it. So, I think maybe that possibility is open for writers to be able to bring some of the worlds you've discovered to readers in sort of this kind of setting.
And there has been an enormous change in the last 10 years since I wrote my last book and this one, just in how much you have to do and the promotional process, and the fact that everything now goes on the internet. And so if you have a review that is not good, it's up there, and it's up there forever. And you used to get your reviews in the mail from your editor, a couple of weeks after they happened, and nobody ever really saw it or knew about it one way or the other. And now, you really are exposed in a way that you weren't 10 years ago. And your reviews are, they're posted everywhere. And so you sort of, sometimes for the better and sometimes for the worse, but they are there, and that's a definite change.
Okay, well, we have time for questions from the audience. Yes, sir.
Yeah, they are here. We had the Texas Book Festival last weekend or 2 weeks ago in Austin, and Texas Monthly, the three editors of Texas Monthly that have been editors, three people, Greg Curtis, Bill Broyles, Evan Smith, and then Mike Levy, the publisher, were all given the Bookend Award, which is the award they give every year to some writer or literary entity that's made a big difference in the state. And I had a chance to reflect on that question because I had to give a little talk beforehand. And Texas Monthly, and I don't want to say that it's the only thing that has made this difference, but it was a complete magnet, I think, for writers in Texas. I was there from almost the beginning. Sarah and Elizabeth have come in a little later into the pages of the magazine, but it seems like everybody connects with it somehow. It's just kind of the lodestone in a way. And I remember thinking, right before Texas Monthly started, I was thinking, how do I get out of Texas? I was mowing yards for a living, and I wanted to write, and I thought I had to go to New York, and I didn't have any way to go about doing that. I had no money for gas or a plane ticket. I barely had enough money for the gas for my lawnmower. And then Texas Monthly started, and I had a job. And I was, people like me or like Gary Cartwright or Larry Wright or, Mimi Swartz, tons of people.
Yes.
Well, thank you. I mean, for me, every project is a little bit different, and they start. I've sort of been tracking something I'm working on now, and kind of keeping track of the accretion of material, where it comes from, like how you have one idea and it collides with another idea, and nothing is wasted. Somehow they come back into being when you need them. So the process, in art, it's called found objects. You sort of go out, trolling for things, and they're out there. But for me, always the essential is something I care really, really a lot about, because you have to care tremendously to propel yourself through years of working on a novel, for example.
The process for me is very disorganized, and I never have a vision of where I'm going when I start out. I'm hoping to change that with the next book. I keep thinking I'll actually have an outline, but with my second book, they were still clamoring for an outline. When I finished the book, I just because I just can't think that far in advance. And but it is problematic. You do end up. It's sort of like driving in a fog. You go down these wonderful roads and you find things that you wouldn't have found if you tried to plot your course. It's more efficient to plot your course, but you do end up with some different kind of discoveries when you don't know where you're going, and it's actually in some ways kind of more fun, because it's an act. It's like living your life. If you were living your life by an outline, you might do a better job of it, but it wouldn't have the richness. And I'm always just trying to figure out what's going to happen in the next chapter. I mean, we were laughing the other day because I was remembering this time when Steve and I went to lunch at Julio's, and I said, okay, well, they've been digging, in my book, we're 6 inches down, so they're about to find what's in the grave, and what's in the grave is a big thing in the book, because it's not what they expect to be in the grave, and so Steve said, oh, great, so what's in the grave? And I said, I don't know. What He said, you don't know what's in the grave? I said, no. What do you think's in the grave? And I mean that was the level of my thought that had gone into the origins of the book, and so I like the way it turned out, but it took me 10 years to get there, and so I wouldn't advise writers who are starting out to write without an outline or even without really an idea of what the story's about. But it does make the process fun if you're not in a hurry.
I find the story there, when you're working on a novel, it just kind of hovers there, and it's kind of out of reach, kind of out of sight, but not totally. And you can you approach it a little bit, and you learn a little more about it. And in my case, I sometimes write kind of an outline, but like Elizabeth, I mean, a lot of it is just flying blind. With The Gates of the Alamo, which was a massive book in terms of pages, the book starts out with a prologue in 1911, and there's the main character is very old, and he's driving down in the Battle of Flowers parade, and he sees this guy in a jaguar skin suit standing on the street in San Antonio, and it freaks him out. He has this major kind of moment where it just jars him into this state where he then starts remembering his life, but what he's remembering is the whole book. So I wrote this whole book, and about page 900, I thought, who's that guy in the jaguar skin suit? I'd forgotten about him. But if I didn't have an answer for who that guy was, the book wouldn't work. And it's a high wire act. try to think of these things when you need them. And fortunately, it popped into my head who it could be. But this happens all the time. I mean, you just have to sort of trust yourself that there is, this kind of hovering, vague story is in fact something that you're going to bring into some sort of definition.
I don't know how they wrote before computers. I mean, the idea of dipping the quill and and you would have to have a plan. You could not rewrite that much. And some of those books established well before, but
longhand, you start all over again.
But Dickens did some of his in installments. I mean, they were published before he actually had finished writing, so he had to have a sense of where he was going far more than I ever have. But yeah.
Other questions? Yes.
Favorite authors or authors who inspired your life?
For me, lately it's been Patrick O'Brian, who's written these 20 novels about the British Navy and the Napoleonic Wars, and I just think they're just unbelievably great. Early influences for me were kind of pot boilers. Like I read completely indiscriminately in high school. I'd read big giant historical novels, and then Hemingway and Faulkner, and I couldn't tell the difference between Anthony Adverse and The Sun Also Rises. I mean, to me they were just books, and I think I think in some ways that kind of blind reading is very healthful for a writer. To not get too focused on who you love the most, but to kind of range widely and kind of indiscriminately, and read some trash every now and then. It kind of gives you a little hybrid vigor as a writer.
I always panic at these questions because I have very little time to read, and I'm a very slow reader, and so I just don't actually read books. I mean, I read a lot of nonfiction for my research, and I'm doing that all day, but exactly. So it's just research, and when people ask about my favorite book, I start thinking about, way back when I was reading a lot of Herman Wouk and Gore Vidal and the historical fiction writers and things from my childhood, because I so rarely actually read fiction today. So.
I bet I read a lot of the same books Steve did. Did you read Frank Yerby?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, Frank Yerby wrote these fabulous pirate novels. And Taylor Caldwell?
Oh, like, what was that book?
Glorious Physician, or what was that?
Yeah.
Beloved
Glorious
Physician.
Yeah.
Dear, yeah. Oh, yeah. These were great historical. I ordered all those. I currently really like Nick Hornby and Tom Perrotta, and I find them very inspirational. I like Margaret Atwood a lot. Probably the most influential novel I read growing up was 100 Years of Solitude. I think that influenced not only me, but the generation of writers that followed. When I was little, I loved the Wizard of Oz novels. Those were my favorite novels. For funny books, I love Confederacy of Dunces. I think that's my favorite funny novel. I love Charles Portis. He's a great novelist in Arkansas.
Mark, did you have a question?
My question had to do with voice. Sarah mentioned earlier that you had to come up with a different voice for the new novel, and I'm wondering how you would describe each of you, if you can, sort of the ideal writerly voice that you have, or that you are attempting to achieve in each book. Is this humorous, detached, passionate? How would you describe this writerly voice, or does it differ for each book, for each chapter, for each character?
Yeah, I think it differs, and I think it's really formed.
Could everybody hear the question? He was asking about voice and if it differs for each book or each character and how you define the voice in a book. Go ahead.
Yeah, the characters define it. I don't really set on a voice probably until I'm about 100 pages into a book, and I know who the character needs to be, and
Go back and rewrite those first 100 pages.
yes, yeah. What about you?
Well, Contemporary writing is much harder for me than historical writing because when you're writing the historical passages, it can have a kind of a lyricism and a formality to it without sounding pretentious or completely self-absorbed. The kind of voice that tends to bother me a lot is first person, just because a lot of books, whenever I start reading a whole book that's going to be written from one person's point of view, I immediately am annoyed with this person for having that much self-awareness or that much, feeling of self-importance and any description they give of themselves, what they look like, how they acted, becomes too self-aware in a way that's unattractive, and so I dislike that character often. So that first-person voice sometimes can really play out badly. Now, if it's in a journal format and somebody's mostly commenting on what's happening around them rather than on themselves and perceiving and describing themselves, then I think it works. But I find just straight historical, omniscient narrative voice the easiest, and it comes very easily because it has a level of detachment, a level of formality that's comfortable.
Yeah, the tone I always try to strike, it varies between books because the varying degrees of things you want to get across, but the tone I strive for is just authority. I want the reader to know that I know what I'm doing. And so how you get that, I don't know. Sometimes, but it's either there. For me, it's either there or it's not. I mean, if it's not there, I'm not going to write the book. But just a certain kind of power and knowledge that the reader is aware of, that the author possesses, or that the storyteller, if that's not necessarily the author, that there's some compelling reason this person is telling the story, and this person knows the story. Those are the two.
And I think one trick to that is, which you always do from the very beginning, is knowing what to leave out. I mean, I think when you're an insecure and a writer, writers tend to be sort of, obsessive people, fascinated with minutia, really, when you're writing particularly historical fiction. And you have to know what to leave out, because if you put too much in, it's just not interesting. And so that is a gift when you know what to leave out or what to take out. And if you know from the beginning what not to put in, that's even better. And I think that is the authority that Steve's talking about, when there's a sense that you don't have to over-explain, that what you say is going to stand as it is, and you don't have to give a lot of backstory, a lot of explanation. You don't have to sort of be describing overly over-describing your scenes or your information. You get that sense of the reader is usually, I think, willing to go along for the ride because they feel certain that the writer knows where they're taking them.
I like Larry McMurtry had some great advice. He said, "Don't be afraid to be boring."
Yeah.
And I think
it's terrible advice. Why would you want to bore people?
I think it has to do with the authority of knowing what you think your reader needs to know, whether they need to know it or not. But maybe if you're Larry McMurtry,
you're a little more self-confident than I am, apparently.
Other questions? Yes.
Any interest in movie rights to related works?
There's always that ephemeral sort of nebulous interest, but there is some interest. We'll see what happens with it. I would like to see this book.
Because it's so cinematic.
I think it's great to see the dancing come to life. I wish I could include like a DVD with every copy of the book so that people could see what it looks like and hear what it looks like. Because that's a lot better than anything I could ever put on the page.
Yes.
When did you see your first flamenco?
I saw my first flamenco performance during this tumultuous 7-year love affair that I had, and I did what a lot of young Americans did at that time, and I bought a Eurail pass and put on a backpack and went to Europe, and I spent 1.5 years in Europe, and during that time I saw a flamenco performance outside of Barcelona, and that was the first time that I saw something externally that matched my internal landscape, and so I sort of filed that away as a version of True North for me, and then it emerged as my mom used to live 2 blocks away from the University of New Mexico campus, and so I would go and visit her, and gradually I became aware that my alma mater had become essentially the North American Center for Flamenco. And so I said, "Olé." Olé, olé.
Other questions? Yes, sir.
For Mr. Harrigan, do you really think we're going to have to get a McDonald's to be calling this space?
I'm sorry, what was the question? Oh, yeah, something about McDonald's. I
We're
heard.
going to have to get a McDonald's if we call it space.
Oh, well, yeah, I think so.
What I'd like to know is y'all, I think, have written journalistically to some extent, but I don't think you consider yourself journalists. But I want to know if you think that maybe fiction is a threat to journalism, especially the historical writers, and what do you think of truthiness?
Truthiness.
I love that word. I'm very compulsive about the truth, and I think it plays in what Sarah and I were just talking about. Larry McMurtry always feels, I think, free to take a lot of liberty with the facts, and that comes from self-confidence, and it works for him. I mean, his books are wonderful, and but I remember one time I was writing a scene, and I had to get a character a couple hundred miles south, and all he had was this sort of half-lame mule, and he didn't have enough time to get there by the time I needed him to be there, and he was supposed to meet up with Urrea's army, and General Urrea, who was a general for the Mexican army. And so I was puzzling over how to get this character down there quickly enough, and Steve said, well, why don't you move the army? And the thought had never occurred to me, and it was horrifying to me, and I just felt like, because it's 600 men, you can't just pick them up and put them down where you want them to be. So there's a very literal interpretation that I have, but I like having done it that way and stayed with the facts, because my readers then know that the army is where it's supposed to be, and that those liberties have not been taken, and that the research is there, and there aren't mistakes, unless I don't know about them yet. But and I like that when I read historical fiction. I like to feel like I'm learning something, like I can trust the information that's in there. So.
I feel that way, not just about historical fiction, but about fiction in general. I think, unless it's a wild, imaginative, clearly delineated, imaginative thing, I just want to believe it. And I think it's a novelist's responsibility to portray the world accurately, except when that novelist decides not to. But I think the kind of underlying assumption is we're reading about the world in which we live. And I think the journalistic background that I have maybe prejudices me in that direction. But that's how I feel most comfortable.
I think I had an experience similar to Steve's. Like, the only buffs more rabid than Alamo buffs are flamenco buffs. So I knew as I was writing I had better get everything correct, or I would hear about it. And so that will keep you in line, and it did.
The related question is, do you know of a kind of major error in any of your works that you would like to correct? Something that somebody's pointed out to you?
I had a very, very kind diplomatic email from somebody saying that I had misstated that Teddy Roosevelt was not, he was not governor of mayor of New York. He was governor of New York. Anyway, I misstated what his position was during a certain year. And it was a really nice person who emailed me and told me, and I was happy to know it, and it's being corrected for the paperback. So, but it's sort of horrifying, when you find that, because you feel like, well, only one out of 2,000 or 3,000 people are going to realize this, but then they're going to distrust you, as a historian. And when you've taken great care to get things right, that's it feels like a shame, to make a mistake.
My biggest mistake in print was I got the Immaculate Conception wrong. and
It can happen to anybody,
B.J.
right?
Sparks of McAllen, Texas, took me to task for that. I went to Catholic school. She doubted that I actually went to Catholic school, and so I thought the Immaculate Conception was, what did I think it was? It was that Jesus was born without sex, and it turns out it's Mary was born without sex.
No,
Is that
without
what?
sin. Without the stain of original sin.
Which is, okay, the stain of original sin. Oh, good Catholic boy. So anyway, that's my biggest faux pas.
In the Gates of the Alamo, I got a couple phrases wrong in Spanish. I'd had a friend of mine, I'd gone over it, I had a friend of mine go over it, but there were a couple I missed. And they're not hugely significant, but it poisons the book for me. I can't, I see somebody carrying that book around, I have to stop myself from saying, don't read that. There's a line wrong. And you just get very, it's tainted, when you make a mistake.
Well, and one of the frustrating things is once you send that thing off to the publisher, it is out of your hands, and they don't want you trying to micromanage the publication process from Texas. And it's so hard for me and every time they would send me a draft, I would read through the draft, and then I would go back and compare it to my draft to make sure that they had already inserted all the changes that I had made the last time, which is very time consuming. But you're trusting some copy editor somewhere, who has a busy life and a lot of other books to deal with too, to have gotten that change in that you made. And it's really nerve-wracking how little control you have over anything once you turn it over to the publisher. I mean, you don't get to pick your cover design. You don't get to, choose which blurbs they put on the back. None of that. And it's really frustrating how you're sort of at the mercy of everybody else's perfectionism or lack thereof at that point.
Okay, we have time for one more question. Yes.
How do you start a book or novel and not finish it?
Never for me.
Never, yeah. Never, yeah.
No, I haven't either. That's interesting.
It's too hard to write something and then not follow through for me.
And you can almost make anything work once you get into it.
But I think it's probably true that all three of us don't rashly embark on a book. I mean, that's something that requires, in some cases, years of deliberation and living with the idea to make sure that it's a good fit and that it has the staying power for your own imagination.
Yeah, you're picking characters that you're going to spend every day with for a number of years, and a place and a time, where you're going to be. And so it's not a whimsical, cavalier kind of choice. I mean, it has to be something you feel very, very passionately about.
Well, those of you who have read the books by these authors know how good they are. And those of you who haven't, I encourage you to take advantage of the opportunity tonight to purchase these and get them signed by the writers. And we'll have a book signing around the corner. Thanks, everybody. Thank y'all. Oh, yes. Okay.
Writers for a number of years. One thing y'all danced around but never said outright is my observation is that a key ingredient is having the good old American work ethic. And the press is full of the Hunter Thompson lifestyle, blah 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 blah. But most writers I know, it's almost an 8 to 5 job, and you've got to have a good solid work ethic. Would you all agree with that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I don't think you won't find any of us taking issue with it.
Yeah.
I think, but it.
You go to work every day. You work every day. You go to work every day.
That's true.
And it is an act of discipline, but it's also, I think, for a lot of writers, and I know it is for me, it's an act of discipline to stop. Because it's also a passion and it's a drive and it's what you want to be doing, and you often have to remind yourself that there is this real life, and and there are these real people in it, and that you owe something, in that direction. And so even though it is, it's an 8 to 5 and it is a job, at the same time it's a love affair too. And so there is that compulsion that brings you back, and that makes you excited about turning on the computer in the morning, I think, usually.
I think all of us have rejected, either consciously or unconsciously, this romantic ideal of the writer's life as this sort of, disorderly, catastrophic, thing. I mean, it's just, I think if you get, getting your life in order is a good thing for a writer. It doesn't quench your imagination. It doesn't slow you down. It speeds you up. And I think, just what you were saying, paying attention to the way other people work. how they go about their lives with sobriety and industry. I mean, that's how to be successful. Is to do that, to be good at what you do and to be diligent about it.
Thanks again, y'all.
Thank you.